So, what is physical seat of thoughts? What is the source of our emotion or discussion making or patience or pains and everything else? Well, it's the brain, and it's said to be the most complex mechanism in the known universe. You might expect, given all it is, and given it all this, what will look pretty. Philips' shimmering lights and glass tubes and mysterious colors, but in fact it looks really king of gross. It looks the 3-day-old method. It's grey when you make it out of the head, and inside the head it's bright red because of the blood. In fact, it turned out very surprisingly that the source of the mental life of our conscience is meat. In fact, you could eat it. People have eaten brains. I've had the brain with cream sauce, not human brain, mind you, but I've had brain with cream sauce. It's not bad, but it makes the puzzle all the more harder. How can this fishly thing give rise to mental life? That's the question I want to explore in the lecture and the rest of the lectures. I want to do so by starting with the smallest relevant parts, different parts of neurons. Then explore how the neurons are connected together, how they're wired up, how they're from different subparts of the brain, like the hypothalamus and the frontal lobe. Finally, talking about the brain and the larger perspective, looking at two halves of the brain, the left half and the right half, and how they interact. Now there's a lot of stuff of the brain, a lot of chemical stuff, a lot of different parts, but there's action is the part that does the thinking, the part that's focus of most of our research is the neurons. It's not an accident they call the study of the biological basis of Ford's neuroscience, because it all comes from the neurons. Then they get to the cell body, which sum up their pluses and minuses. When you reach a certain threshold, a certain amount of pluses, there neural firing. Firing takes place through an axon, and the axon is much longer than the dendrites. In fact, for some motor neurons, it's very long-ended. There's axons running from our spinal cord and the way of big toy. You could think of the relative size of things in terms of a basketball and a 40-mile garden house. Surrounding the axon is what's called a myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is, you can think of our insulation as VDTC, like information of wire. So the information comes through the dendrites and summed up in the cell body, and it's transmitted through the axon. So what neurons do is they sum up and transmit information, and we know that there is a lot of them. By some estimate is like 100 billion, or the estimate tend to be different and way around, but there are billion upon the billion of neurons, and each connect to 1,000, maybe tens of thousands of other neurons. Finally, there's interneurons, which connect different neurons without making connecting with external world, either for sentience or through motor action. Now the main thing to think about for neurons and neuron theory is that it's all or nothing. It's like firing a gun or sneezing. Neurons either fire or they don't. Now you might think that's a little bit strange, particularly when you think about sensory neurons, because your experience seems to be a continuum. So you have seriously neurons of eyes, and you can distraction from a very dim light and very bright lights. You have sensory neurons in your finger, and you could distinguishing between gently touching something versus between stepped it in the tip of your finger or something. But still the neurons are all or nothing. The way we get to this continuity of experience is the neurons can code for intensity in different ways. So one way is in terms of the number of neurons for that fire. If X neurons corresponds to mind experience, X times 10 neurons may correspond to an interest experience. Another factor is the impulses frequency in individual neurons, and individual neurons might denote a mild sensation by going fire, fire, fire. So you have neurons and the neurons talk to each other. They talk to each other because axons and axons of one neurons will communicate with the dendrites of another neurons. A long time ago, people used to think that neurons were wired up together like a computer, but in fact, neurons don't actually touch one another. There is a gap between the axon terminal of the neurons and the dendrite of another one. This gap is known as a synapse. When one neuron fires, the axon releases neurostimulators. There are chemicals that shoot out over the gap and affect dendrites and other neurons. As I said before, the effect of these neurotransmitters could be existential, which is that they raise the energy, so they increase the likelihood of a neuron firing or inhibitory, so that they bring down the likelihood of neuron firing. That's interesting, is that different neurons shoot out different neurotransmitters, so they have different effect on another neurons that they made contact with. Works by finding with the neurotransmitters, and these can be either antagonists. They lower down intensity of things by binding of the dendrites, making it hard to create more neurotransmitters, or they can increase of amount of neurotransmitters available in different way egos. So you either pumping up the volume or turning down the volume. So you think about different drugs and their effects. There are curry. Curry is a drug that used by South American Indians. It's an antagonist. It blocks motor neurons from affecting their muscle fibers. It keeps your motor neurons from working, and that does it pleases you, and the large another does it kills you, because motor neurons also keep your heart beating. So shut it down and you die. There's alcohol. Now alcohol also has an inhibitory effect. You might think that starch, because then I drink alcohol, I get all excited and happy and goofy. But you have to keep this in mind here. The way alcohol works is it inhibits part of your brain that does inhibition. So you have part of your brain that says, don't say that the other person, keep your parts on, stop eating, and alcohol basically inhibits that part of the brain, making you more expectant. Then other the course of things, in course of drinking too much, it also inhibits other parts of the brain. So you could pass out and fall on the floor, and the large another does die. So both curry and alcohol in different ways bring things down. Another drugs bring things up, so amphetamines for instance increase the amount of norepinephrine, which is another neurotransmitter that responsible for genicular arousal, and this is how drugs like speed or cocaine work. Other drugs like Prozac or L-Dopa interference neurotransmitters in the way inquiry, for instance, the recipe of dopamine or serotonin. So the more general idea is the way neurons lead to thinking is that they form clusters of networks. Their clusters and networks are compilation devices that do interesting things like recording face or walking upright or understanding sentences or doing math or expecting great sadness or falling in love and so on. We know that that's possible because we create compounding machines that work in certain ways. That if you wipe up compounding machine in certain compounded ways, it can do mechanism, play, chess to think, simulation and so on. And so you may be interested to the project of compilation neuroscience, which tries to ask the question how are neurons wired up to do interesting things and uses our own success at computationally theory of model. Then sometimes takes the inference the other way around, which is you can see how people do and then use this knowledge of how people to do it to create computationally system that can do it well. So how is the brain wired up? Well, if you might imagine that it's wired up like a portable computer, like a laptop, like a sort of computer you're looking at now. Into some records it is, but there's a couple of reasons why it can be, and both of them have to do with how well the brain works. So first, the brain is highly resistant to damage. If you get a knife of the brain, if you get damage to the brain, it won't typically shut down the whole system. But the brain is wired up in a certain way that makes it highly resilient. The second thing is the brain is wired up in such a way that makes it work very fast. So computers can do millions of operations per second because they purely electrical, but brain tissue is much slower and can spend the time to do many steps. So to put it a different way, if your brain was wired up like a computer, it would be so slow as to be neither unusable. It has to be wired up in a way that more efficient, that allow the slowness of brain tissues and nerve systems and can still computer things at a human level, which in other blindly fast. The details of this is something we're going to talk about Thor, of course. We're not actually going to end up explaining different characteristics, different anatomy of neurons, because we can't, and because we want it to have finger level explanation. So then I talk about how people learn language or how they recognize face. We're now going to talk much about neurons in particular, but we will talk about different brain areas and how they work. Then the assumption is the bet is that everything we talk about is more functional ways, can immediately reduce down to large networks of neural systems, and the turn will immediately reduce down